Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Job Hunter podcast. This week we will bang the gavel and cross-examine our guest as we discuss the ins and outs of being a criminal barrister. From wearing funny wigs to courses in advanced arguing, we will discuss what it takes to become a lawyer in the UK, as well as debunking some popular movie myths. So as always, grab your favourite beverage, as long as you're not driving, kick back, relax, and let's get on with the show. That's to say, we'll be discussing what happens if you ever unfortunately find yourself in court. I'll be hoping that this interview will pass sentence and I don't end up serving life for my terrible puns. I'm delighted to welcome my guest this week to the Job Hunter podcast, Joanne Toomey. Jo, maybe you could start off by telling us exactly what is a barrister and what is the difference between a barrister and a solicitor?
Oh, this is a good first question. I've answered this question many times in interviews. A barrister is a lawyer, so they're legally qualified, and they are the person who stands up in court and argues a case. So the solicitor does most of the prep work and a lot of the client handling, so they'll kind of do witness statements and the kind of litigation running up to trial, and then they will instruct the barrister just before trial. They'll send over all the documents about the case, and the barrister then takes on the case and argues that in court.
Interesting. So what's the difference between a barrister and a solicitor advocate?
Okay. So there's not a huge difference. So solicitor advocates have rights of audience before a judge. So a solicitor advocate can present a case in court like a barrister, but solicitor advocates aren't trained in the same way. So the bar is seen as kind of the gold standard of advocacy, whereas solicitor advocates are solicitors, and then they just get the rights to do some of the lower levels cases. You'll never have a solicitor advocate in the Supreme Court, for example.
So did you always know you wanted to work in the legal profession, or is it something that you came to a bit later in life?
No, I knew from pretty young that I liked to argue. That may come as a surprise to you. I knew that I liked to argue, and I knew that I had quite a strong sense of what at least I considered was right and wrong. And I liked the kind of academic rigor as well as the advocacy. So I almost looked at what I enjoyed and looked at what I was quite passionate about, and that fell pretty squarely within, the frame of a barrister. So I did know from quite young what I wanted to do.
Is it arguing, or is it trying to convince someone around to your point? Because they're two very different things, aren't they?
It's a bit of both. So I've given kind of a very narrow view of what a barrister does in their day-to-day, but barristers are often involved in negotiations, settlement meetings, mediations, adjudications, all of the shuns. And so you have to use those different skills at different times. So sometimes it is trying to convince someone round to your point of view. Other times it might be a very academic argument or a strict application of the law. So it is kind of all of the above, and then you use those skills when appropriate at different times.
So what's your Latin like? Is it any good now?
No, because you're not supposed to use Latin, because you're supposed to be able to translate these concepts down to kind of, Joe Public. So no, do not test me in any Latin. I will quit the podcast. No, I'm joking.
So what exactly is involved to becoming a barrister? It's not a case of you just rock up to a pub and they go, here's your certificate when you reach the bar, is it? That's a terrible pun again.
That one was really bad. Meet you at the bar. Yeah, no, there's quite a few years of training, although I appreciate you just had some doctors on, so it's not as many years training as doctors. It's if you go kind of directly through, then you will do a law degree. I did a 3-year law degree, and then the 1-year bar course. It's called the BPTC, the Bar Professional Training Course. You do that for 1 year, and then you are called to the bar. And that's basically where one of the Inns of Court, which are kind of the professional home of all barristers. They call you to the bar, and it's at that point on that day where you officially become a barrister.
You get to put on the scraggly old wig, and that's that then.
Yeah, well, I mean, so I have my wig, and I was like, yeah, stunning, great, gonna wear my wig. And then the area of law that I do, you don't actually wear your wig unless you're in a really senior court. So there's pretty much no chance of me wearing my wig anytime soon.
So what is the area of law you do? What is the different areas of law?
So I do mainly employment and personal injury. I do kind of dabble in advisory work for other stuff, but that's kind of broadly where I sit. But there's loads of different areas of law. There's criminal law, there's family law, there's commercial law, there's arbitration, there's shipping, there's tax, there's family. What have I missed? There's wills and probate. So you can basically just go on and on and on about different areas of law. I do personal injury and employment, where you don't really get to wear your wigs unless you're in the High Court or above. But criminal, for example, some of my peers that went to the criminal bar, they stick a wig on you and you're in there every day rocking your wig.
So I'm a huge fan of Suits. It's a great TV series. How obviously you don't deal with corporate side of law, but how would you say that depicts lawyers? I know that's in the American system, but is that a fair representation of the legal proceedings?
No, shockingly, the hit drama is not an accurate portrayal. So you're right, it's a completely different. So most American legal dramas, like, The Good Wife, Suits, love them all. They are literally my guilty pleasure, but they are so far from reality. They might as well be science fiction. The legal system's entirely different. So in the UK, we've got a distinction between barristers and solicitors. They don't draw that distinction in America. So that's why you'll see kind of the lawyers doing both the preparatory paperwork, the negotiating, and then they'll turn up and talk in court. And we don't do that. But also the kind of really, I would say, merging of ethical lines, would be putting it very, very politely. That's not okay, obviously, and that's not done. There's a really high ethical standard that all barristers have to adhere to, not just because we regulate it, but because it's the right thing to do. You can't, my first duty, so when you sit your bar ethics exam, which is a huge portion of the bar exams, it is, you have to learn your primary duties to the court, and that's not to mislead the court. So Harvey Specter, stunning though he is to binge watch, is not the oracle of the UK bar. So
now you're going to tell me that the judge doesn't get to bang the gavel, no one shouts objection, and no one shouts, "You can't handle the truth" in a courtroom.
Yeah, no, sadly.
Now pop my balloon.
Yeah, no, sorry about that. My first trial, I did try and stand up. I object. No, I didn't, obviously. No, that doesn't happen. I mean, I can't speak. These are obviously very American stereotypes. So sadly, in the UK, the judge doesn't have a gavel and nobody's banging a gavel. There's no kind of, and equally people aren't in the crowds, shouting up. And one of my favorite myths on these things is when someone walks in with like this silver bullet piece of evidence, and they're like, this is it. And, they don't have to disclose it. And there's no rules of getting the evidence in, and someone can literally just hand a file, from the back of the courtroom, and it's just allowed in. And so, no, I mean, it's all a farce and a lie. But I'm realised that your face is now dropping as I'm kind of bursting all of your legal drama bubbles.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to have to watch all these series back with a bit of cynicism and reevaluate my life. But there we go. What would you say like an average day looks like if you are in court? And follow up, how would you put someone's mind at ease if they were going to court for the first time?
So I mean, going to court, there's so many different ways in which you can go to court. So in what I deal with, you're usually either bringing a claim or having a claim brought against you, or you're a witness to someone else's claim, all of which are quite nerve-wracking because inevitably you're going to be on the stand. So you're going to, and when I say on the stand, I mean, sometimes in the courtrooms that I'm in, they're literally, it's no bigger than my study and the stand is a chair in the corner. So it's not always that fancy, but you're going to be on the stand. You're going to be under oath. You're going to have affirmed that you're going to tell the truth. And then you're going to have some stranger come and cross-examine you for however long and basically tell you you're not credible, or at times you're lying, or you're mistaken, or that cannot be right. And you're going to be scrutinized, and every word you say is going to be held against you. I mean, I'm making it sound maybe worse than it is, but it's quite an ordeal coming to court for someone who's never done it before. And normally these people have got quite a lot riding on it. So in an employment tribunal, it's, someone's job or income or reputation, or if they've been discriminated against, it's, there's some very meaningful things that they're giving evidence on. And then on the flip side, when I'm doing personal injury, these are people that have had, sometimes very serious injuries, and their compensation is going to depend on whether or not this judge believes them, or the quality of their evidence. So no, nobody really enjoys coming to court except the barristers.
So I say, which do you prefer? Do you prefer prosecuting or defending?
So I don't prosecute, because I'm not criminal, but I act for both the claimant and the defendant, or in the employment tribunal, there's no defendant, they're a respondent. I act for both, and I really find that it depends on the case. So if, for example, in the employment tribunal, if you've got someone that's clearly been discriminated against or unfairly dismissed or something of that nature, I feel so passionately that I'm so glad that I'm working for this person, to really right this wrong that is, a society-wide terrible. And then for this individual, it's had such a huge impact on their life. And then you flip it the other way round. And if you've got, some kind of rogue claimant bringing a case against this kind of, small startup, and they can't afford it. And, you feel really sorry when you don't quite buy the allegations. So I think it depends on the case. You can feel like a bit of a hero and also a bit of a villain, depending on the facts of each case. I sometimes don't feel that fantastic when it's one insurance company fighting another insurance company. That doesn't really heal my soul, but it does pay my rent. So...
And when you were kind of first starting out, how did you cope with that feeling when you left the courtroom, whether or not you won or you lost, and how do you kind of control your emotions in that sense and just separate the two out, really?
It's tough. I have to say it's tough, because you're always told that you're there and you owe a duty to the court, and you're there as an advocate, not, you're not giving your own view. That's why if ever you see anyone in court, they're making submissions. They're not, giving their view. You don't say to the judge, in my opinion, it's this, or my view is that, because I'm not really there to give a view. I'm there to kind of articulate the argument best so that the judge can make a determination. So I guess you kind of get round any, you say, look, I'm there to do a job. And what I think it fundamentally comes down to is, I believe everyone deserves representation. So even if, you're not fighting the best case, or you kind of wish you were on the other side, you're there, you're helping that person who would otherwise not be able to have, a lawyer, or hopefully they wouldn't be able to put their case as well as you are, use your, they're utilizing your expertise. And so you're assisting in that way. And if I've got a terrible case that I think is, rubbish, you just have to hope that even when, you do your best, justice will be served and the right conclusion will be arrived at. That's a very idealistic view. That's not quite my experience of what does happen.
So what would you say are some of the biggest struggles that you face day to day with your job?
Imposter syndrome is definitely real, particularly at the beginning. I mean, so I've been doing this for a couple of years now, but I was a pupil for a year. And I'm terrified pretty much all of the time in court. It is, everything feels very new. And I realize that you just had, 2 junior doctors on, where it really is life and death. Nobody dies if I don't do well. But, the decisions that I make on the spot on that day will bind, my client or whatever going forward, and potentially have huge ramifications. So every decision I make, and a lot of the decisions you make, you're not 100% sure of. The easy decisions, they're the ones that you're really confident in, you don't think about. The ones that are more difficult, or the compromises and the judgment calls that you have to make because the judge has just asked you a direct question, they're the ones that are more difficult.
So you just kind of live to learn with it in a sense, and
I'd say my main struggle, and also a fear of being sued for professional negligence. That's pretty struggling.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
It's yet to happen, but it's all right. I've got insurance. No, I'm joking. Genuinely, there's a real fear when there's, if I'm giving someone advice or, making their case in court, there's a real fear that if I mess up, then that could in a very real way come back to bite me. I counteract that by being so super prepared for every single thing I do. But that's in itself is grueling and time consuming, and, takes its toll.
So what would you say is your kind of end goal? What's the progression in the legal profession, and where do you see yourself? The classic interview line of where do you see yourself in 10 years' time?
So, interestingly, barristers are considered to be junior barristers up until they are Queen's Counsel. Now, QCs are literally they're just the best barristers in the country, and they are normally a huge number of years call. They're anywhere between 15 and 40 years calls, so they've been doing it for that long. And they're just the kind of creme de la creme of the bar. But really, everyone else who isn't a QC is considered to be a junior barrister, which is quite wild because, some of the most brilliant, senior juniors are lumped in the same category as me. So they don't really split it up. You're either a QC or a junior barrister. In terms of where I would want to be in 10 years, I'd like to have a really well-rounded, good practice. I'd like to have built a good name for myself. I'd like to have a better balance between work-life balance. But I think most people, when they're starting out forging a career, particularly as I'm self-employed, you have to kind of sacrifice in the early years and you reap the rewards of that in the later years when you can maybe take your foot off the gas.
So that's interesting that you said you're self-employed. I think a lot of people wouldn't have realised that about barristers in the legal profession. What exactly does that mean for you?
So it's a very weird system, but most barristers are self-employed. So it's there are some at the employed bar, but most of them are at the self-employed bar. And we sit in what are called chambers. And that is basically a collection of barristers that have decided to kind of share a name, share a brand, share clerks, share a building, share paper costs, everything. You all, club together, and then you create a brand, and then you only allow certain other barristers into that, and but you're all technically self-employed. So no other barrister. I don't have a more senior barrister telling me, what I can and can't do. But equally, as I say that now, I obviously, if a senior barrister in chambers comes to me and asks me to do something, of course I do it. But technically self-employed, so I've got a bit more autonomy about what I do and don't do, and when I work and when I don't work, that kind of thing.
And so how do you kind of mentally switch off from your job at the end of every day? Because I imagine it's very high pressure. You've got, like, say, people's lives on the line in a different way. What do you do to kind of separate yourself from that?
So I'm probably not a good example of like a really healthy lifestyle. I really struggle to switch off, not because I'm particularly worried about it, but because I can't help it. I'm almost always going through the different contingencies. But I find particularly difficult is the night before a big trial. So I'm like rehearsing my opening, even though I know what I'm going to say. I've got it written down. I know it in my head. there's no need for me to be rehearsing it at 3 a.m., but I am. And then, in the morning in the shower, I struggle to switch off a bit, but equally, I think it comes in kind of peaks and troughs. So you'll have a really busy period where you won't be able to switch off and it'll be very high pressure, but then that will all of a sudden finish. The last day of a long trial will finish and you might not have anything. And then you are literally kind of waiting for your next bit of work. And you're kind of euphoric because you've got through the trauma of the last trial. I'm also guilty of, I've got emails on my phones, on my iPad, everything. So I'm almost constantly online or contactable, and once you make yourself available to solicitors to say, call anytime, and they really take you up on that. I'm not great at switching off, but I don't know, I like to go on long walks and go to the gym and get away that way rather than, I think if I'm just sat at home doing nothing, I'm probably thinking about work.
So really it's a case of trying to just get it out of your head as much as you can when you're not there to really decompress. Yeah,
I think that would be a really healthy approach would to kind of, when you're at work, and when you're at home. But especially with lockdown, and now I'm working pretty much exclusively out of my study when I'm not in court, I don't even have that kind of journey to and from work to like psych myself up, but then decompress. And, I don't have that physical separation. So I think that's been a bit more difficult. And, you're tempted just to pop in, just to check in your study. Whereas, I would never just pop into chambers to check something. I guess I reckon if to be honest, if I really tried to separate, work out, I reckon I could do a better job, but I don't really it doesn't bother me working late, or, so I have some of my best ideas at like 3 a.m. or some of my most brilliant, submissions come to me in the shower and stuff. So that's just the way I like to work. I reckon I could probably try and be a bit smarter about taking time away, but when I have a nervous breakdown in 2 years, you'll remind me of this podcast and point to this moment.
Definitely. So obviously I want to give my listeners a bit of value. I want to give them something they can take away from this. We've got an advanced arguer in our midst, and I want you to give me 3 tips that anyone can use to win an argument, because I feel like this is now the time to utilize your skills.
Okay. The first thing is be a human being. So maintain good eye contact. So use language that the other person can understand. Don't try and speak like a lawyer. And I know that sounds crazy, but use the most simple language you can to best convey your point. Speak slowly, which anyone listening to me ever will know that that's something that I'm forever going to be working on. I can feel myself slowing down now as I speak. Speak slowly. It gives your brain time to think about what you're saying, and it gives the other person time to actually absorb what you're saying. And you're going to be much more persuasive if the person isn't playing catch up with your last sentence. Third tip, be confident. Whatever you are arguing about, argue it like it goes to your core, that this is the one belief that you hold in the entire world. Even if you think that you're arguing either a terrible point or a repugnant point, you have to get behind it. Because if your instructions are that you have to fight that point, then that's exactly what you have to do, come hell or high water.
So you've got to fake it till you make it.
Fake it till you make it. That's pretty much, that is, I don't know what, if there was one secret at the bar, I think it's fake it till you make it.
So all those years of study, all those countless exams, everything, it's all boiled down to fake it till you make it and speak slowly and be confident.
Yeah, pretty much. You've actually foiled me.
Oh, you go. Maybe I should be a barrister. I'm in the wrong career, clearly. I've got one more question for you. And it's really... What's the one piece of advice or something you could instill on someone that's considering a career in law or as a barrister? What was the one thing you'd tell them, right as they're starting out?
I think you really have to want it. I think if you're kind of umming and ahhing about like, maybe I should be a lawyer, or maybe I should be a this, or maybe I should be a that, I think it's grueling to get there. I think I maybe have not really sold it, but not really gone into the kind of reality of it. But it's a grueling process to actually become a barrister, and then specifically to get pupillage in chambers so that you can practice. I think there were like 98 pupillages last year, and there were like 1,700 applications. So it's a really, really horrible process filled with kind of rejection and being told that you're not good enough. And I think it takes a certain character who really wants to make it to A, take that risk, and B, to be knocked back, because I don't know anyone that has kind of succeeded without getting a single rejection from single chambers. I think you've got to kind of feel that this is the only thing that you want to do. I think if you're thinking, oh, maybe I could be a lawyer, but maybe I could be a scientist, maybe I could be a race car driver, and that's fine. But I think this is something you've got to really look into and commit to, because if you're at all, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, then that's going to come through and you're just going to end up disappointed.
Brilliant. And I've got one more question for you, actually. It's a similar question that I asked Matt and Tom in episode 1, but are there any perks to being a barrister?
Are there any perks?
Perks of the job.
Yeah, there are. People immediately think you're smarter than you are. When they find out you're a barrister, they think that you must be very smart, and that's not necessarily true. Other perks. I win most of my domestic arguments. I don't know if that really counts as a perk. I don't think that my boyfriend sees it as a perk, but pretty good at arguing, outside of court. Friends, family, you name it. Come to me, I'll argue with you. I don't have many of them left, but at least I beat them in that argument one time.
Fantastic. Joe, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. And let us know how you get on with all of your legal proceedings, and look forward to following your career closely.
Perfect. Thank you for having me.
Say a massive thank you to Joanne Toomey for coming on and giving us a rare insight into how the legal system here in the UK works. Although I must admit, I may never watch Judge Judy in the same light again. If you've enjoyed this episode, please let me know. It really helps massively if you can subscribe to the podcast. And if you're an Apple Podcast listener, please leave a review and rating. If we can hit 100 reviews by December 2nd, I'll organise a giveaway prize draw for you all. If you haven't already, check out our Facebook page and support group where you can find out more about getting into law and other professions. It's at Job Hunter Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, or search the Job Hunter Podcast support group on Facebook to find out more. You can also find us on Twitter at Job Hunter Pod. We have also just launched the Job Hunter Podcast YouTube channel, where you'll be able to find a more visual view of the show. When things are back to normal, we are hoping to have video recordings up on there too. If you have any success stories, I want to hear them. If you have recently found a new job or achieved some form of job-based success, then send it to jobhunterpodcast@gmail.com and I will shout you out at the end of the show. Once again, thanks for listening to the Job Hunter Podcast. I've been your host, Tim French. I'll catch you next Wednesday.